Hey, sixth grade, Mr. Denton here. We're going to do a little mini lesson today on the capital city of ancient Alexandria. And this is following our lesson from last week on Alexander the Great. And this is going to talk about the magnificent city he built and had built in his honor. Well, we're just going to jump right into it. After Alexander the Great had conquered most of the known world, he took his army and went down into Egypt and took Egypt over. And during the process of this, he decided he was going to build a capital there in Egypt. So he found a port city that was a small little, well, it's really a small town slash village on the Mediterranean Sea. And this ancient city was called Rakatis. And then he took that city over and renamed it Alexandria and ordered how he wanted the city to be rebuilt in his honor. And the city was rebuilt in such a way that it was extravagant. A fourth of the city was dedicated to royal palaces. Even the other parts of the city where everyone was allowed to be were paved streets, statues, perfectly carved statues everywhere. Some statues made of marble. Some buildings had marble facades on the outside of them. And so this city was renamed and built in his honor in 332 BCE. And it was really a famous city for two reasons. The first reason is there was a magnificent lighthouse built there. And the second reason is the library that was built there. So we're going to talk about both the lighthouse and the library. So let's take a look at the lighthouse first. This is it here in the harbor. And the lighthouse was built on a small island out in the harbor. It was called the island of Pharos, and the lighthouse was between 330 and 460 feet tall. Looked similar to what's in the illustration here. Um, the outside of the lighthouse was covered in polished white marble. The top of the lighthouse had a large oil burning lamp. And behind the oil burning lamp, there was a huge piece of polished bronze that reflected the light uh, out into the ocean and amplified the amount of light that was being emitted from the top of the lighthouse. Now, what's the purpose of a lighthouse? Well, you got to put yourself into the mindset of you're a seagoing traveler in the ancient world. And if your boat is still sailing at night, you're not going to necessarily be able to see the land, or maybe even worse, where there are rocks and other debris under the surface that you're not aware of. And so lighthouses were built to warn sailors, hey, you're coming up on land, or you're coming up on rocks, or you're coming up on a shallow area, your ship could go aground. And you got to think that in ancient times there are no electrical lights, so when you're coming up on the coast, you're not going to see the lights. The lights that were existed then were oil lamps, torches, candles, and things like that. And the majority of those do not put out bright light at all, so you wouldn't see them necessarily from your ship at sea. So a lighthouse was very important to keeping people safe. And so the lighthouse at Alexandria was between 330 and 460 feet tall. And so it was one of the tallest buildings in the world at the time. Not as tall as the Great Pyramid, but probably the second tallest building in the world at the time. The lighthouse at Alexandria is one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. And the only one of those seven wonders of the ancient world still standing today would be the Great Pyramid. Sadly, the lighthouse at Alexandria was destroyed by a series of earthquakes. Um, I think that's most of the facts. Oh, there's one more fact about the lighthouse. It was dedicated to the god Zeus. We know all about those gods. We definitely talked about those before we were out of school for the virus. Moving down, next up is the Library of Alexandria. All right, so the Library of Alexandria was one of the other, well, it's basically the most famous library in ancient history. So when Alexander the Great ordered the city to be built, not only did he order the building of the lighthouse and the palaces and everything else that was so grand about the city, he wanted the best library in the world to be in Alexandria. And the goal of this library was to own a copy of every written work ever produced. Take a look at the picture here. You see that there are shelf after shelf after shelf filled with papyrus scrolls. Papyrus, we know from our studying of Egypt, was a plant that grew near the Nile River in Egypt, and they made paper out of this plant. And this is before books, as we know it, were really being used or made. Books or anything that was written on scrolls and rolled up. And you can see all of these are rolled up scrolls. And so their goal was to have a copy of everything ever written. And they say that they had about 400,000 scrolls in this library. The library had classrooms. It had a central. This is like the central area of the library with a dome ceiling, and then it had two really big classrooms and a bunch of smaller classrooms that were on the outer parts of the building, and all through the rest of the building were shelving units for the scrolls. So this became the center of knowledge for the known world at the time. It was kind of like, to be honest, it's kind of like the internet of the ancient world. If you needed to do a search for some information, you went to the library at Alexandria. Or in modern days, you might do a search online, on Google maybe. And because they had all of this knowledge located in one place, it brought all the best minds of the world came to Alexandria and came to this library to study and to do research. And that made the library at Alexandria the first ever research institute, and they basically studied everything. Like I just said, philosophers and scientists of the day came there to study and add to the knowledge. Um, it was just a vast amount of knowledge of the ancient world. I find it super fascinating. I wish we had the ability to read some of the knowledge that was on these scrolls, because the library eventually um, falls. There are debates as to what actually happens to the library, but the library no longer exists, and as a consequence of it no longer existing, all of the works and written works on these scrolls, they no longer exist. And so it would be really cool to go back in time and be able to research in this library and see what kind of lost knowledge we had about the world in those days. There are two basic debates into what happened to the library at Alexandria. The first debate is during a war that was going on in 48 BCE. This part of the city was burned and the library was burned to the ground. And then there are some other reports that say, yeah, there was a war and some of the library may have been damaged, but the library still existed after the war. And over time, it had just disappeared from history, but with no real explanation. So, regardless, the library does not exist anymore. Let's take a quick look at our questions. Here we go. First question: list two reasons why Alexandria was a special city. They don't have to be super. You're not writing multiple sentence answers there. One sentence for each. Number two, explain why the lighthouse at Alexandria was incredible. Paragraph answer with at least three examples from the text. Also include a sentence and an introduction sentence and a conclusion sentence too. So that is a 5-sentence paragraph. Introduction, three examples from the text, and a conclusion, all about the lighthouse. And then you're going to do a little bit of information about the Library of Alexandria, and you want to tell me why it would draw philosophers and scientists in from all over the world, and that is a 2-sentence answer. If you guys take your time, read back through the text, rewatch the video. If you have any questions, you can call me, you can text me, you can message me on class tag or email me. Take your time, do your best, and next week we will start the study of ancient Rome. See you then.